Very pleased to welcome Professor Philipp Hoffmann. Peter Hoffmann is a historian of physics, thinking primarily about the history of German science and technology. He wrote about Ernst Mach, Max Planck, and Albert Einstein. Hoffmann's book, Einstein's Berlin, is a unique look at the life of Einstein during his years in Berlin. It follows Einstein in his connection to the city and its people, to culture. In his work, Hoffmann often focuses on the intersection between German science and general changes and transitions that the German society and institutions undergo. He has also researched the community of German physicists during the Nazi regime, and he has this book as an example of an outcome of this research. The German Physical Society in the Third Reich, and this came out 10 years ago. 10 years ago. It's a book that Professor Hoffmann has edited. In 2020, so he held many positions over the years at the Humboldt Foundations, the Max Planck Institute for the History of Science, and the Humboldt University in Berlin. In 2020, he was awarded the Abraham Pace Prize of the American Physical Society for an outstanding scholarly achievements in physics. Today's talk is How Did Physicists Deal with the Nazis? You're welcome, and look forward to that.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction and for this invitation coming to speak in your explanation and general to come to Tel Aviv. So it's a very difficult time. My topic is an ongoing one, science in Nazi Germany, and my focus will be the physics. The transfer of power in Germany to the National Socialist on January 30, 1933, signified a fundamental intrusion into the political life of Germany with well-known catastrophic consequences. The effects of Nazi rule were not limited to politics and the direct exercise of power, because as in every dictatorship, the Nazi regime extended its claim to power gradually over all areas of public life, not least over that of the sciences and its institutions. This was particularly evident in the early days of the Third Reich at the universities, and here is shown an event at the University of Leipzig, and with a collection of SR stormtroops and the leading representatives of the Leipzig University. The seizure of power brought various players onto the scene. For instance, supporters of the Nazis and the scientific community who now hoped to put their understanding of science to good use and take control of the key positions in science policy. Among them was a physicist, Johannes, a renewed experimental physicist and Nobel Prize winner in 1919, who had become an outsider after World War I, both scientific and socio-political. Scientific, he had become a vehement opponent of modern physics. That means he consistently rejected Einstein's theory of relativity and above all quantum physics. Sociopolitically, he was an ardent admirer of Hitler, who joined the National Socialist movement already in the mid-20s. He now hoped that after the National Socialists take over, he would be able to return to academic life, for which he had withdrawn in the mid-20s and has worked as a private scholar and entrepreneur. Just few days after the seizure of power, he wrote on February 3rd to his colleague Philipp Lenard, also a Nobel Prize winner and long-time Nazi activist, quotation, "The time has finally come that we can assert our concept of science and research. I took the opportunity in my letter of congratulations to Minister Fritz, whom I know personally, to point out that you and I would be happy to make our influence available to him in relation to the scientific institutes under his authority." Furthermore, he also articulated his special interest in the vacant presidency of the Imperial Institute for Physics and Technology in Berlin, which he has already held in 1920. The coup d'etat succeeded, and on May 1st, 1933, Stark was appointed as sixth president of the PDR by Reich Minister of the Interior Wilhelm Frick, of course, also a long-time Nazi activist. Even not Friedrich Paschen, the acting president of the Reich Institute, had resigned legally to a colleague, quotation, "Nobody wants it. Only the minister who can hardly be convinced by the reasons of the scholars will be." The PDR was not just any research institution. It had been founded in 1887 by Werner von Siemens, a big founder of German electro industry, and as one of the first non-university research institutes, and had since made a name of itself with groundbreaking research results, particularly in the field of precision physics. It was considered as the first institute of big science in the sense of modernity. Its scientific recognition was not limited to Germany, but had a strong international significance. Among other things, the measurement of thermal radiation were carried out in the optics laboratory there, which became the basis of Max Planck's quantum hypothesis in 1900. The number of employees and its increase were also impressive. You see that on the slide. Were also impressive and demonstrate its unique character and the importance of the institute. Nevertheless, for the policy of autarky and rearmament during the Third Reich, which, however, was associated with a loss of its scientific significance. Stark has hoped that the takeover of the PDR would enable him to become the leader or the Führer of physics, even of exact sciences in Germany, but that ultimately failed in this endeavor. His gigantomanic plans for the restructuring and expansion of the Reich Institute, on the right side you see such a plan, on the left you see an overview of the institute in 1935 about. And yes, but this gigantomanic plans also failed. In a memorandum for Hitler, he noted, quotation, "The new Imperial Institute for Physics and Technology will be the central organ for organizing all scientific research into the processes and properties of inanimate bodies, as well as the central organ for scientific support for the entire economy and national defense of the German Reich. That never worked. What did not fail, however, was the implementation of the infamous law for the restoration of the professional civil service of April 7. This law, known as the Civil Service Act, or in German Berufsbeamtengesetz, BBG for short, was primarily directed against Jewish citizens, including those who had including all of those who had converted for a long time, and even in the second generation, the grandparents. You had two grandfathers who were Jewish, they were, by definition, Jewish. Also, plays no role if they had already, since one generation or so, baptized. But this law was also directed against political opponents of the regime. Furthermore, it was not only applied to civil servants, as the title of the law suggests, since the law was also very quickly imposed on employees in general, as well as for any public institutions or association. And furthermore, it was accepted by the army, industry, and the liberal professions such as doctors and lawyers. That means more or less the entire German society was acted by the new law. The brutal expulsion policy of the Nazi regime led to a huge wave of dismissals and an international migration movement, the extent of which has not been precisely measured. There were thousands of people. What is known is that the scale was enormous and that it represents a significant turning point in the history of science in the 20th century. As part of the history of the PTA in the Third Reich as a project, I was able to determine the following data about the dismissed PTA fellows. Well, you see it on our right. There were total 12 fellows of about 327 fellows of the institute, and that means 3.7%. Among these 12 fellows were 9 scientists of 133 scientific employees. That means 4.5%, and 3 technical employees. So we say, let's say in German, we are the service people, or a kind of middle power. That means 1.6%. In comparison to other academic branches, the numbers are significantly less. What can be said about the difference between the branches? You see there that in the universities we have about 20% of the academic staff, and that varies on the universities. The University of Berlin has about 35%, Munich 15%, and at the end, Tübingen with 4%. That's the other. Just to explain the other topic, we have not time for that. But you have that have in mind. Let's speak about what can be said about the difference between the two groups of scientists and of technicians. Technician means they have not a degree in science, PhD also, but they have a degree, for instance, as an engineer or something else. But what can we say about the differences between these people? By the way, my college, who have dealt with the dismissals at universities and other academic institutions, have not yet considered or even discussed this differentiation up to now. Among the scientists, only one fellow were expelled for paragraph 4, that means for political reasons, and the other 8 were for paragraph 3, that means Jewishness. But 2 of them were only 2 of them were practicing Jews. The other one were secular, or they were already were converted to Protestant or to Catholic within the Catholic Church. So that is for the scientists. In the group of technicians, we have only 2 fellows who were expelled, who had to leave for paragraph 3, and 2 others for paragraph 4. In comparison to other academic branches, all these numbers are significantly lesser as for the universities, you see that, and also for the other big outer university institution in Germany, in 1911 founded Kaiser Wilhelm Society, which is today much more famous as the PDR. But at that time, it was a kind of matter of competition of things. But because of the small numbers involved, it did not allow for any real statistics, of course. But I would nevertheless venture the hypothesis that the social situation of the group of scientists differed fundamentally from that of the group of technicians. The latter were more so-called proletarian, and in this respect, also more political than the academicians. Among the academicians, we had only one person who was engaged in politics, and he was a member of the social democratic party. So there were no political communists. What also can we say about the difference and how we can explain it? Unfortunately, at the moment, not really many. And for myself, I would only say that there existed already anti-Semitic and also political filters, for instance, for left-wing party members, just mentioned, in particular for communist people. They were discriminated at that time in general. And that happened already in the application or recruitment process. We have such investigations, for instance, for some universities. That's always the reason that numbers differ so many. So that in some universities, mostly in the provinces or in a strong anti-Semitic environment, they avoid to hire Jewish people. their examples and investigations. And this had minimized the proportion of Jewish or left-wing employees over years. Furthermore, we should have in mind that the PDR also had the reputation of being a conservative institution in the scientific habitus. Friedrich Parchen, already mentioned, and as Stark's predecessor as a PDR president, has made the sarcastic statement that the gentlemen from the PDR are not physicists anymore. Instead, they make pass out of the big Kohlrausch, that was a very famous scientific textbook and handbook at the time, and even today. But this activity with the utmost precision. So that means they are not very creative, but important too. This raises the question of the extent to which such a conservative scientific self-image also shaped social behavior. Unfortunately, this is a question which still remains largely unanswered, although it's relevant in other contexts too. There is another point which my analysis showed. In many of the analyses available, the reference value is not uniform. For example, the percentage given for layoffs at university usually refer only to the teaching staff, but not the assistants or other helpful people. So they have nothing to do with the total workforce. The same is valid for most of the studies that have been carried out recently on ministries and other institutions in Germany. Qualitatively, the reference value hardly changed anything, with only maybe half of this them. But quantitatively, the statements differ greatly, as my study is showing. I would like to emphasize something else. This inclusion of other groups of employees, technicians, engineers, and so on, social groups other than academics also come into focus, and with them their fate, which differs greatly. Many were too unknown, too insignificant, or did not have the financial means or personal connections to emigrate. In many cases, we do not know what became of them after the dismissal courts. This is also reflected in my research. For example, of the 12 expert scientists, only 5 emigrated, to US or UK, and 1 fled to Palestine. This differs significantly with the number of immigrants at the Kaiser Wilhelm Society. The competing sister institutions there, as I already mentioned, where about 90% have immigrated. At the universities, where it's still about 60%. So in the PDR, that's only 20%. Certainly, one reason is the fact that the KBG and the universities fellows were often more prominent and had a high profile in the academic status, and were therefore more competitive on the international academic market. But which other factors have played a role again, a question which are still unanswered. Last but not least, there's a big difference in the treatment of Jewish and political employees who fell under the civil service law. And alleged new were dismissed even if they could be treated as borderline case or exception. Such was, for instance, the case for the internationally renowned photometrician Walter Georbeck, who was denounced to be Jewish in 1933 first, about 5 years after the law. First, as so-called half Jewish. Also, he used all possible legal means and even an assessment by the Reichsstelle, by the Office for Genealogical Research, to try to obtain a downgrading of his Jewish descent. And even his department head has declared in a petition, that sounds today strange, that Georbeck did not show any Jewish character. But all attempts failed, and he has left the PTR in 1939. He then wintered the Third Reich in industry and far from the capital in the province. By the way, denunciation played a major role in the expulsion of employees from the PDR. This is evident not only in the case of Georbeck, but also in the time up up to the law passed on April 7. For instance, in the case of the physicist Günther Wolfson, one of the two who lives as a Jew, who was a scholarship holder of the German Research Foundation and worked at the President's Laboratory. The activists of the Nationalist Workers' Cell and the National Civil Service Labor Association demand by actions and in a letter to the President that he should not allow Wolfson to work at the Eisenanstalt because of his Jewishness. This was commented by a colleague who wrote in his diary, the President was therefore unable to keep him. This was at that time not legal because the law was not still in work. But the power of the street has forced a library ban, and so Wolfson was leaving the PDR immediately. With a few intermediate steps in which Albert Einstein also played a role, Wolfson was finally able to emigrate to Palestine in 1934, where he established the Physics Institute of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. But on April 13, 1948, his life ended tragically in the Hadassah convoy massacre in Jerusalem. If somebody is interested in this case, a colleague of mine, Stefan Wolf, he is doing a lot of good work about emigrants and so. He is looking for the surviving family here in Palestine. He could found it not because there's only one picture of Wolfson who is still existing. That's only 5 slides. finish my today's PTR story with a story of another expelled Jewish PTR fellow, also still an active Jewish leader. It is a physicist, Max Jakob. He was a technical physicist in applied thermodynamics and was part of the famous München School of Low Temperature Physics around Linde and Knoblauch. He is famous for his pioneering work in heat transfer, which was carried out at the PTR from 1907 on. His research on steam and air under high pressure and the condensation technologies have made him internationally famous, in particular in the English spoken word. Very active in national, for instance, as a member or an activist in the Association of German Engineers, and also international in the American Society for Mechanical Engineers. After dismissing of the PTR in 1935, because of his status as a frontline firefighter, he, for such people, there was
exemption. They were exempt. They had exemption in 35.
Yes, there was an extension for 1 year. And so he could stay there until after the death of Hindenburg, who had negotiated quotation with the Nazis that Jewish frontline fighter should expect from the law. But that changed suddenly after the death of Hindenburg in summer 34. So after he was expelled in end of 35, he was invited by the ASME for a lecture tour through the whole US, which was following in the next year with an appointment at the today's Chicago Tech in 1936, where he started a new career with the age of 57, very unusual, and wrote heat transfer to the USA. That is one of the examples that with emigres from the Nazi, for instance, also aerodynamics was the case by the Hungarian aerodynamics. I forgot the name. So that happened also with aerodynamics in the same way. The theory of technology of heat transfer were transferred by Jakob. Since 1963, the ASME is given a Max Jakob Memorial Award, and that is also very unusual. Let's come to another examples about how physicists deal with an atheist. That is a so-called germ physics. That was an idea by Philipp Lenard, as already mentioned, a renewed experimental physicist and very famous and influential at the turn of the 19th to 20th century. And Nobel Prize winner of 1905 as well. His idea was developed after World War I first and became a more or less official National Socialist doctrine during the 1930s. Lenard and Stark became two authoritative spokesmen of the scene, which was a breakthrough of obscurantism and racism and anti-Semitism, into the body of knowledge of physics. It makes the anti-Semitic Nazi ideology virtually acceptable to the exact national scientists. In my opinion, the German physics is often somewhat overrated, especially by historical laymen, and not least by physicists and other national scientists. But the German physics has only a limited impact, restricted mainly on the 30s and almost exclusively in education and appointment policy, but not in physical research itself. It was rejected, you can say strongly rejected, by the majority of the physics community and considered obscure but dangerous in its effect. There are no detailed studies on the support of the German physics today. According to my estimates, the circle of German physicists can be estimated at less than 100 per person, if at all. I would more realistic, my feeling would be around 50, but that's not secure. But much more important is that among this circle, only 3 were truly recognized as physicists. That are the above-mentioned Nobel Prize winners Philipp, Lenard, and Johannes Stark, both above. As well, the solid-state physicist and geophysicist Rudolf Tollacek. He was a PhD student of Lenard, who worked as a professor at the Munich Technical University from 1938 and briefly edited the Grimse and widely used textbook in Germany before and after Tollacek. All others had scientific or even physics training, but they were more philosophers or party functionaries, often young and ambitious opportunists who, together with German physics, disappeared without a trace after the fall of the Third Reich. But in its short blooming, the German physics was in some way dangerous, and its climax came in the late 1930s, when the National Socialist press, for instance, in particular in the Völkische Beobachter and in the Journal of the SS, the Black Corps, the Schwarze Corps, were published aggressive papers who denounced Heisenberg and other representatives of modern physics as so-called white Jews and representatives of Jewish thinking in science. The background of this campaign was to prevent Heisenberg from succeeding his teacher Arnold Sommerfeld as chair of theoretical physics in Munich. Heisenberg, also a Nobel Prize winner in 1933, was considered at that time the most important theoretical physicist in Germany, and would have been the legitimate successor. Stark and companion, who were behind the campaign, were able to prevent the appointment and push through a second-rate theoretical mechanic named Wilhelm Miller. However, this was a Pyrrhic victory, because Heisenberg was able to use his private connections to win over the powerful Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler, who prohibited further campaigns by German physicists and rehabilitated Heisenberg. During the following years, the reputation of German physics became smaller and smaller until it more or less collapsed during the Second World War. Modern physics, but not obscure German physics, which had been well suited to the National Revolution and the National Socialist upheaval in the early days of the Third Reich, but it was not useful to realize Nazi Germany's policy of autarky and rearmament. Heisenberg was fully rehabilitated then in 1942 when he became director of the Institute of Physics of the Kaiser-Wilhelm Society. You see it in the middle. Above is Heisenberg and his teacher, Arnold Sommerfeld. When he became director of the Institute and was simultaneously appointed as full professor of theoretical physics at Berlin University. And in this case, it was not so much the alliance with the SS that was decisive, but rather the fact that the now all-powerful Minister of Armaments, Albert Speer, had become the most important protege, and Heisenberg himself had taken over the scientific management of the German Uranium project. During this days, in summer 42, Heisenberg wrote to his wife, quotation, "Suddenly, I no longer have to worry about the entire Lenard clique at all, and can achieve almost everything that is important to me." So it was a kind of liberation. Also, immediately after the discovery of uranium fission by Cohn and Fritz Strassmann and Lise Meitner as well, a German uranium club was established in the spring of 1939. Its task was to deal with the technical, including military, possibilities of this discovery. Until 1942, they were roughly on par in his research with the corresponding American work. But after the Manhattan Project was established, they fell far behind the American efforts. Not out of stupidity or moral scruples, but we can read in the wide literature sometimes, but simply because Germany lacked the necessary resources, economical, scientifically, to carry out such a gigantic project. When Enrico Fermi achieved in Chicago at the end of 1942, namely the design for a self-sustaining and energy producing child reactor, that means the development of a uranium machine, was narrowly missed by the German scientists under Heisenberg in the spring of 1945 and at the end of the war. In particular, due to a lack of heavy water in uranium. There was actually no realistic chance of an atomic bomb being developed in Nazi Germany. Also, this occasionally appears implicitly in the Wonder Weapon program during the dawn of the Third Reich at the end of the war. There was no realistic chance for a German atomic bomb, but for a uranium machine, pilot. But it was a matter for the future because of its great potential for Germany, as Werner Heisenberg, another actor in this field, has said in the town hall. There's much more to say about the atomic bomb, but for you, okay. There's much more to say about the alleged German nuclear project and other aspects of physics in the Third Reich. But my time runs out, and so let me briefly touch on the role of the German Physical Society, the Professional Association of German Physicists, which at the time represented about 3,000 physicists only. That's how small and manageable the physics community was back then. In short, at first, it was reluctant to fall into line, or the society was reluctant to fall into the line with the Nazi, but it were made some compromises which were necessary, and only expelled, and society expelled only in its last Jewish members relatively late, before Jewish members were discriminated, or for instance, it was forbidden to visit meetings of the society and so on. But they could stay if they want, still member. But they were expelled. Well, the last Jewish member were only 6 or 8 members relatively late after the pogrom in November 38 first. Here you can see the letter which Peter Debye, then the head of the society, had gone out at the end of 38. Despite the circumstances of the time, it's nevertheless shameful. So, quoted to the German members of the German Physical Society, given the compelling circumstances, the membership of German Jews as defined by the Nuremberg laws in the German Physical Society can no longer be sustained. In agreement with the executive committee of the society, and therefore call up all members who come under this provision to communicate their resignation from the society committee. So that they suggested that not the society itself should have dirty hands, but they should ask for resignation. But that was a very common way in the German society to handle these problems. The society was in this way part of the National Socialist system, also one occasionally rebelled and vacillated between autonomy and self-adaptation. During World War II, the German society even showed solidarity with Germany's aggressive war aims as part of a self-mobilization campaign with a so-called program of the German Physical Society for Development of Physics in Germany was with. But this was already or more oriented to a post-war Germany and has realistic, not so much to do with the situation of the society and or the general situation with Germany or Nazi Germany at the last year of the war. It was catastrophic. It was clear the war will be will be ended and negative for Germany. But this, but it was open in the discussion, mostly also in the discussion which happened in a private sphere, for which Germany it should be. Since also in the mind of many Germans, German physicists in particular, there were no division between Germany and Hitler's Germany. It was never outspoken which Germany it was. So at the end, let me still give some examples about active resistance against the National Socialist regime. One unfortunately has to say there was more or less no, or at least too little. I found only 4 examples, and that is first the physical chemist Robert Hoffmann. He was a leading member of the anti-fascist resistance group Neubeginn or New Beginning, and was arrested and sentenced to death in 1943. But nevertheless, he could survive the Nazi regime because courageous colleagues who claimed him for war-related research. So he could start a new career. It was in East Germany, and he became one of the most famous dissidents in Germany. Yes. Somebody is a little bit overestimated. He was an East German Sakharov. The other one is the crystallographer from the Marburg University, Karl Hermann. He and his wife helped to free Jewish fellow citizens in order to save them from imminent deportation. In 1942, they were sentenced to several years in prison, and they were liberated in 1945. Aumann and also Hermann were honored as righteous among the nations. Another one is Ferdinand Meyer, and that's a very interesting case, and it's a very interesting biography about him, which appeared, I think, 2 years ago. He was an applied physicist at the Siemens company, and he was a PhD student with Philipp Lenard, by the way. In 1914, when he was on a travel business travel in Norwegian, he provided British Secret Service anonymous. He put a letter in the mailbox of the British embassy, and he served with the British Secret Service with important information on radar development in Germany. This is called today as an Oslo report. After a denunciation in another case, for that he would certainly sentence to death because it was Landesverrat. Meyer was sentenced in 1941 to KC imprisonment for listening enemy radio stations and criticizing the Nazi regime. He remained at the prison until 1945, and later he could continue his work at Siemens, but he don't speak about that. So it was and secrets up shortly before he died. Last but not least, the Austrian-born metallurgist and advisor of the publishing houses, Springer, Paul Rosbaud, who helped some Jewish colleagues and friends, among, for instance, Lise Meitner to assist Lise Meitner to and he delivered a spy bulletin. The British Secret Service with information about Germany's armament, in particular about Nazis' wonder weapons, V2 and V1, V2, and also the uranium project. There are some other, I would say, border cases, for instance, the physical chemist Max Vollmer, who also helped US, and therefore his career was restricted. Although Fritz Hausermann's, he was an emigre to the Soviet Union, he was involved in Hitler's purge. He came then in 1940 back to Germany, was arrested, and worked then in nuclear physics, and had also some activities who one could see as an act of resistance, but not more. In this respect, it's not surprising that the upcoming denazification of Germany after its liberation by the Allies in spring of 1944 was a difficult undertaking, especially since it soon had to take place under the conditions of the Cold War and the confrontation between the two blocs. Many of the Nazis were get a so-called Asylschein and were more or less freed from their activities in the Nazi. And as this would be all topics for separate lectures or even a series of lectures. But I would like to end my lecture not with such an outlook, but with a letter from Lise Meitner to Otto Hahn from the weeks immediately after the end of the war, which identified the essential point of such denazification. But the letter was never sent off. So with that letter, I will end my lecture. I have to thank you for your attention and patience. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing these materials. Yes. Okay. There are several studies of different disciplines in Germany. Moritz Eppler and Corey on the mathematicians, and we have here Amir Teicher, who works on biology. I work a lot on philologies, and one of my impressions from these other studies, and I wonder what have you seen by the physicists, is that in some way the international community is still functioning. So the international network of scientists is still at work in Germany throughout this period, which means that they have contacts, and they do consider sometimes the influence that the action within Germany might, what responses it might provoke by the international community. So I know in other fields that you can hear by the Ministry of Culture and others that people are suggesting that some acts against Jewish scientists or against other people might provoke harsh reactions, sanctions, or disconnection of scientific contacts from the international community. Do you see any such discussion in this field?
Yes, there are some, but also there's an example that there's a correspondence between Samuel Gaudsmith and Werner Heisenberg. Also, famous American physicist, and Werner Heisenberg was a professor. He was a PhD student of Fritz in keeping, and was a professor. And Gaudsmith and Gerlach know each other very well. We met later in Town Hall. And there started a discussion that how to say you are so aggressive against the youth. I will leave the German political society. And then started a discussion that argumented this way: we should us behave more liberal, because with such an aggressive anti-Semitic policy, we will lose foreign members. And that's not only a reputation for a loss of reputation, that's also an economic effect, because they send us the member donation in valuta. So it's not clear if that was only an economical argument, although it was a hidden criticism to the German ethnicity, which is economic argument to change the policy. So we have such one. Of course, we have also international context, was in particular to Berlin. It was a very important place for Germany, Heisenberg and other ones. But that was also used by Nazi physicists. Nazi physicists was not only the German physicists. For instance, Asger Jordan, he was one of the founders of quantum mechanics and all the quantum field theory. Really a big pioneer. But he was a strong Nazi, but not an anti-sectarian. But he was representative of the so-called four-year plan, so-called, to making Germany prepare for war and so on. And although he wrote about his visits in Copenhagen, reports for the for Nazi officials. So that's a very difficult field, and in some way not very clear to decide what is so. So I think you cannot give a general statement. In general, I would only say, in general, the Nazi ministries were not interested in a strong contact of scientists to abroad. They would control. They can.
But they were sensitive to international criticism, propaganda. Anti-German propaganda was
Yes, of course, that was
monitored.
but that although, but the international contacts were strongly controlled by different institutions. I can only give some examples. It happens well and so. I can know investigation where it was accounted. The quantity of contacts were in which way it was decreased.
Thank you. I have two different questions. So first, if I was not mistaken, I'm not sure. You said that the German physics did influence the appointments or some appointments, and then you suggest that it did not influence the research. But if it had some influence on the appointment, then it by appointing the right, or in this sense the wrong people, you influence the research. So how this goes, because you appoint apparently people who agree with this German physicist, German physics. So this is one question, and another is when you try to talk about the dissidents, you talk about those who stood up against the Nazis in a very strong way. Do we see also some other softer ways in which people, like we have the case of Schrödinger, who emigrated from Germany, although he was not forced to do that? Do we have others that did something similar to that?
Last one. Schrödinger was an exception. He has no reason to emigrate. He was not a Jew. He was not political against or
Active politically. Dissident.
But he was a kind of free thinker, and always said, "No, I will not live under this circumstances." And he gave up his professorship. He was a follower of Planck and went to England. And then he returned to Graz, to his home. And then there was a very irritating thing when the Anschluss came in 1938. He wrote a letter to the Nazi authorities. He offered his cooperation. There's an interesting book, a colleague from Oxford, I got the name, also Schrödinger in Oxford, and he gave an explanation why this help of the archival material from the Schrödinger paper. That was only a trick to free from Austria again. But Schrödinger is such an example. I have not in mind other examples in this way. Certainly, there were such one, but I think the people were not so unknown that the history has forgotten. But I can think over it and remember or have something I can think of. And the last question was?
The question of you undermined the influence of the Deutsche Physik, and then you said that but you said that it did influence appointments. So if it did influence appointments, I would assume that it influenced also the research, because those who were appointed did the research.
When you are in charge. So for instance, Starks was in charge. So one cannot say that the PDR in general became much more wars institute as before. Because as we see here with the number of employees, the PDR exploded. It exploded for economical reason and for military reason. And also, of course, Stark was not a stupid man. You know what physics is and for which. So he introduced to the physical to the college station also disciplines which were modern and innovative. For instance, modern acoustics, but that was field of, and there are some other examples, that were fields which had no touch with modern physics in some way. And although he, in his policy, he did not force in the first view active Nazis. Yet, although the people should understand something of it. But the specific of the Physikalisch-Technische Reichsanstalt was that the president has his own laboratory. And that was used for by Stahl for investigations to confirm his own theory of an atomic model, which was a counterpart to the Bohr's model. And there he made serious spectroscopic work, but in the wrong direction. These people who had under his line to carry out such spectroscopic work were later respected spectroscopists. For instance, one became, after the war, a professorship at the Hubert University, Rudolf Ritschel, and another one went. Ritschel was not really a Nazi, but he was a party member. In some way, he was apolitical. But the other one, Verleger, he emigrated after the Second World War to South Africa and became there respected authority. But in this lab, that was, I would say, the area where his or Stark's obscure theories were carried. So I know And so, yes, you can see that only at such places where physicists in charge who were also fellow of the German, for instance, although Thomas is such case, when he was an editor of this textbook, although he skipped out things which in the, for instance, he gave a strictly different interpretation of the work of Hertz. Although the controversy about the discovery of Planck's quantum mechanics, then he also although a discussion just reflected in the textbook, that he say it was much more done on experimental work as the general story tells. That is in some way not totally right. All the history of quantum physics are the experimental side a little bit underestimated. But that has a specific approach to keep or to bring down the modern physics.
Well, I have a follow-up question about that, because it seems like part of the motivation is to try to associate Einstein relativity theory with quantum physics, as if they're Jewish sciences, as if there are non-German ways of thinking. So can you not say that this is dampening the viability of German science when you have that kind of thinking spread by people like Strauss in Denmark?
But you will company to take down. Stark and Lenard were outside. So it made not a big effect. Poison, but that's remember, Poison also Thomas made precision measurement for to trying to confirm the existence of the India. But they tried. But they are the best experiments possible. So it's actually so this research was, if possible, also at the PTR, there are some cases where Stark invited scientists to say, okay, I have a good experiment to deal out the modern physics. There's a possibility to prove. Not very yeah, because this movement was full of stupid people. And
They're very in charge, the stupid people.
yes, so that
We know it.
and they have not many skills to do such work, which in the mind of Werner Heisenberg was necessary. I think there were more people who were in my nations, but they don't like what Werner Heisenberg had in mind, because it was for them unscientific. And so forth, they were engaged to, yes, the majority of German physicists worked for the war. the sense you work also for National Socialist, but not on the very through level.
Yeah, I think it's a hard question. Yeah, thank you. I think to ask you, my knowledge is very limited. However, you spoke about this Quasi-Schein and how basically the denazification went. So could you tell us me some like very briefly what do we know about the reintegration of these things after the war?
Which side did you read?
I mean, generally, basically, well, so of course it's a big theme because you cannot really separate, let's say the legal thought or whatever basis that you have in your science. You cannot separate what happened before and basically the BG, etc. It's like all the entire law, for example, is the base for what actually happened after the war. However, let's say I don't know to separate between let's say specific scientists. However, there was any kind of policy of reintegration after the war, or do we know? Because we do know that the state was kind of doing this Brazil shine in order to reintegrate people that the knowledge where knowledge was necessary. So I mean, on this one. Thank you.
That was, I would say, in some words. Just after the war, in 45 there was a very strict policy in most of the German institutions. People who were members of the National Socialist, they were expelled. It was very rigid in all zones. And for example, is Stark was arrested by the Americans. And then was made against him a so-called Spruchkammerverfahren and process. His case was discussed, and that was over, and although part of his house in other words were confiscated. But then is the time when he has other process, then he was, and then he had all the right to correct such confusion. And even scientists like Max von Haber, who was very high accepted in the community, and he was anti-Nazi. His behavior was called with some solidarity regarding in some way Stark had some difficult or stupid ideas, but he was a physicist and accepted his Nobel Prize winner. Not going to say Nobel Prize. So there are more difficult things in the world. And then the first decision was corrected. And then he became a partisan. Okay, he was a kind of mediator. Only in the very, very strong case, when people have done crimes, official crimes, then they were violated all the because a very important role plays the Cold War. Because then the Western Allies and the Russians were in a kind of competition. That these people should not go there. Then it was so-called the jacket of silence. Taking over all this. Of course, there are exceptions, but that were the exceptions which were really anti-human crimes. For instance, Mengele in Auschwitz. But fortunately, physicists has not the possibility to do such one. You see, all on the American side, they invited Werner von Braun to come to America because his knowledge as a rocket pioneer
Oppenheimer.
was very important for the American state. And on the other side, for the Russians, the part played not a big role. So they invited suddenly in May, when they liberated Berlin, a group of German physicists who were close to atomic research to come to the Soviet Union. The main scientist was Gustav Hertz, the Nobel Prize winner, because he made this separation, or he had developed the separation method for isotopes that was used for lamps, the case in lamps, neon. But he was invited, and Haber, such an entrepreneur. He never studied physics, but he was a co-inventor of the electromagnet and some other. They had to go to the Soviet Union for about 10 years, and then became that. So yeah, it was very it was coined by the usefulness of the people. And then there were
Okay, that's it for tonight. So thanks very much. We will